Since the outbreak of the coronavirus pandemic, conditions for democracy and human rights have worsened in 80 countries over the 192 reviewed. This is the conclusion of the new Freedom House report entitled Democracy Under Lockdown. Our survey found that governments' responses to the pandemic are eroding the pillars of democracy around the world, said Michael Abramowitz, president of Freedom House. Governments in every part of the world have abused their powers in the name of public health, seizing the opportunity to undermine democracy and human rights. Country experts interviewed under the project identified 4 problems that emerged as the most serious ones during the pandemic: lack of transparency and information, corruption, lack of protection for the most vulnerable people, abuse of power. According to the report, governments are using the pandemic as a justification for giving themselves special powers beyond what is needed to protect public health and have used the new emergency authority to interfere in the law system and impose restrictions. The blatant obfuscation of facts by governments is always harmful, but it is especially egregious at a time when so many people's lives are at stake, said Sara Repucci, Vice President of Freedom House. If the closure of borders in the Schengen area was the first impulse to prevent the dramatic Italian scenario from being replicated, the lockdowns, the closure of businesses, and the sanctions have a political meaning that goes beyond the health needs. But how was it possible that the spectre of a sanitary cataclysm pushed democracy to the sidelines, as The Guardian wrote? And that this also happened in the old Europe, in governments with a rooted democratic tradition, validated by constitutional charters, which are the body of the fundamental laws, and establish as inviolable the freedom of citizens and their right to move freely. There is a branch of psychology that explores the mechanism of the human brain and the conditionings it undergoes that can lead it to make mistakes. Although we have the ability to analyze complex situations, when we have to make a decision, we use shortcuts called heuristics. These cognitive strategies allow us to process decisions more quickly and have proved to be very useful for human survival during evolution. They save mind energy because processing is almost immediate. On the other side, however, they can often lead astray. In January 2020, China is hit by a dangerous virus. For the first time, a country that has always been unfamiliar with transparency opens its doors to the world and displays a terrifying scenario. A terrible virus takes its toll, and China builds a functional containment procedure in a very short time in order to stop its spread and eradicate it. The rest of the world sees numbers and data passing before its eyes and finds itself in a sort of fascination for this perfect machine designed specifically to solve the problem. But while the world watches in awe, the virus comes out of China and enters the rest of the world. After less than 2 months from the start of the emergency in China, Italy finds itself in a condition that apparently looks like that of Wuhan and must figure out the necessary measures to prevent the potential exhaustion of the intensive care units. The Italian government decides to get closed to forbid travel to and from the country, to command citizens to stay home and wear masks. At that time, Italy also decided to close the doors back to science by discouraging hospitals from carrying out autopsies on the corpses. Italy therefore decided not to adopt its own measures, but to apply the Chinese procedure, breaking its own democratic tradition and also scientific practice. That could be the result of a cognitive bias that in behavioral economics is called availability heuristic. The availability heuristics occurs when one tends to estimate the probability of an event based on the emotional impact of a memory and not on its objective probability. A famous example to explain the availability heuristic is the attack of a shark, which is much rarer than what is believed. By far, the most dangerous animals for humans in terms of annual numbers of deaths are in fact mosquitoes, snakes and dogs. Yet if anyone is asked to imagine the most dangerous animal for men, many would answer it is the shark, an emotional idea not supported by objective data. The only way to avoid being victims of heuristics is to maintain a sense of perspective and make a decision taking into consideration all the data involved. The images of Wuhan and its hospital built at speed time were still fresh in the world's memory and probably interfered in the political and technical decisions of Italian rulers and consultants. In the case of Italy, keeping the perspective would have meant, first of all, taking a look at its pandemic preparedness plan, which, even if not updated, had existed for at least 15 years, remembering that the power belongs to the people, and hesitating in applying unconstitutional measures and sanctions. Thinking in a pragmatic way on the absence of cases in some regions, far from the North Area outbreak, exploiting all the science tools. Italy has chosen to take the shortcut to emulate China and to adopt the procedure of one of the most undemocratic and less transparent countries on planet, according to all Amnesty International reports. The outbreak of the virus in the rest of the world may have triggering another cognitive bias, the herd effect, also called the bandwagon effect. Another shortcut consisting by the fact that the more people believe in something, the more others jump on the bandwagon, regardless whether that phenomenon is proven or not. For example, the bandwagon effect is what happens in politics when people tend to be influenced by forecasts and choose the candidate or party that seems to have the greatest chance of success. This is the reason why in many countries it is forbidden to publish the results of the exit polls before the voting time has officially ended. Sweden is considered the exception in the international frame. Swedes are able to move freely within the country. Sweden's strategy to fight COVID-19 is essentially based on recommendations regarding hand washing, social distancing, working from home, and not on mandatory binding measures such as lockdowns. The reasons for these actions, judged by the rest of the world as permissive or lazy, are the political response dictated by the rules of the constitution. The Swedish government is not allowed to declare a state of emergency in peacetime, and it is its constitution that forbids the use of restrictions. It is therefore the Swedish constitution that decided its exceptional policy on COVID-19. According to scientific determinism, there is a unique correlation between cause and effect, and all the processes of the universe are perfectly predictable. That was until the early 60s, when Edward Lorenz, a materiologist, realized that if one modifies the initial conditions of a system, even in an infinitesimal way, its evolution can greatly diverge from what expected. This observation gave rise in physics and mathematics to the theory of chaos, better known as the butterfly effect. In the light of this discovery, Lorenz wondered whether the flapping of a butterfly's wings could cause a hurricane on the other side of the world. The theory finds application in many branches of knowledge, and in psychology it states that any small distress within our brain, even the most apparently insignificant, can give rise to very drastic changes in our behavior and have dramatic consequences. In the pandemic frame, Sweden is called the exception because it stayed far from the herd effect. But can its strategy, consistent with its written laws, really be considered as an exception? What if the exception were Italy and the other democratic countries, given the fact they have chosen an unexpected deviation from their natural democratic tendency, a path unfaithful to the legal skeleton of their system? Did Italy trigger the theory of chaos? Was Italy the flapping of the butterfly's wings? Was it the country that gave birth to the series of cognitive mistakes and shortcuts that compromised the 60 years of democratic tradition? If Sweden had led the way, would the world fight the pandemic in a different manner today?